Hello everyone, AmyR here with Prairie Paper and Ink, and as is the story of my life, I'm running behind. I'm late on this week's Color Throwdown Challenge. However, some of the lateness is attributed to the fact that this video, instead of making 2 cards, I decided to make 8. And instead of using my distress inks one way, I decided to use them 4 different ways. So it just evolved into this whole video that you are watching now. It was a lot of fun though. So I'm using the Neat and Tangled, the new Oak Leaf stamp set and wafer die set, as well as the Maple Thanks stamp set and wafer die set that was released last year that I picked up. And it sold out everywhere and I didn't end up using it. So I decided to use both of them, and I'm stamping them onto some distress watercolor paper with Simon Says clear ink and heat embossing them with some Hero Arts white embossing powder. So I did all my stamping first, coated the images with the white embossing powder, and then I'm going to melt that with my heat tool. So I'm going to end up with 2 of each leaf stamped and heat embossed. And then I'm going to use the remainder of the distress watercolor paper to do some other things. I was all over the place when I was crafting because there's more ideas and more things. So for my first use of the distress watercolor or distress inks is to use them as watercolor. Something I've done for years, absolutely love. I love these inks. If you don't have distress inks, I cannot recommend them enough. There's so much you can do with them. I show 4 ways in this video. So I just mushed these inks onto my craft mat. This is a Tonic craft mat. I showed this in a haul video not too long ago, but I really like it because it's white, so the colors show up better, and it's actually got like almost like a rubbery back to it so it doesn't slip around. So I put that onto my work surface, and then I smushed the colors of ink onto my craft mat, and then I am just picking the colors up with my water brush and then filling in all the areas on these. So I love the design of these leaves and how you have all these different sections, and it's just gorgeous. So really, really simple, nothing too fancy. Since these areas were small, I didn't do anything, any blending or anything like that. But it is something I love doing when I watercolor distress inks. It's just the way the colors will mix together and blend, and it's just a lot of fun. But for these, I kept it simple. So did that, and then I still have all this leftover ink on my craft mat, so I decided to smush a little bit more, spray it with water, and then press my watercolor, distress watercolor paper, just the plain watercolor paper. I could have done this over one of the stamped and embossed images as well. That would have worked just fabulously too, but I wanted to die cut this. So smush that into the paper, sped up the drying with my heat tool, and I could have pressed it again, but I knew the colors were already a little bit muddy. So I just wanted to smush more of these colors and then press them into the paper and then do just several layers. You do it as many or as little times as you want. I ended up doing it like 4 times, like a little bit of overkill, but I was just having fun and seeing where the colors would go. By the way, this is for this week's Color Throwdown Challenge. That's why I chose these specific colors. And the inspiration photo for it too is also why I chose this stamp set. People ask me a lot like what my thought process is. And when it comes to the Color Throwdown Challenge anyway, the colors really dictate obviously, and then a lot of times the inspiration photo is what gets my mind and the wheels turning. So I started thinking the colors, and then the inspiration photo was a bunch of trees, so I started thinking leaves, and I just got that oak leaf set, so that's what I did. So I did that twice and then set those aside. I'll get to them in a minute. For my third way of using distress inks is direct to paper. I've shown this before. Sometimes it works for me, sometimes it doesn't. This time, thankfully, it worked perfectly. So I have my other 2 stamped and embossed images, and then I just rubbed the ink pads directly onto the paper, sprayed it with water, let it dry. I did off camera end up like speeding up the drying with my heat tool, but it's up to personal preference. You can let it sit and dry on its own, or you can dry it with a heat tool. It doesn't really matter. But pressing them directly onto the paper like this, and again, it's distress watercolor paper, so they're meant to work together, but I just love how they immediately activate when you spray them with water. So same thing, let those dry. And then I needed to die cut some more distress watercolor paper, so I'm using the coordinating die sets, and I'm first die cutting the outline of the leaves. And then I'm taking my multi-purpose platform here and I'm going to open it to tab 1. It does depend on your machine and your preferences, but for me, tab 1 works. And then I put down a cutting plate, and then I have a rubber mat here that I've laid down, and then I'm putting those die cuts right onto the rubber mat. And then I'm putting the detail dies right on top, face down, and then my cutting plate, and I'm going to run this through my machine again. So with the rubber mat in place, that means these are going to emboss instead of cut. So I have these gorgeous embossed leaves, and after I did this, I was thinking how gorgeous this looked, doing like just different colors like cardstock or adding some metallic elements. Like they look like almost like real leaves, which is really fun. So I embossed those, set those aside. Since I had my die cut machine out, I thought I would die cut these other leaves that I had, colored. Everything was dry at this point. So I'm going to die cut these with those same outline dies. So get those into place, and I'm going to die cut both of those ones that I had colored in and sprayed. So did that, and then I'm going to die cut those 2 pieces of watercolor paper that I had done the ink smushing onto. So I'm just die cutting those with just the detail dies. I ended up having to run them through a few times to make sure they completely die cut because there's like so many fine little tiny areas and everything. So ran those through, got them completely die cut, popped out all the center areas, and again, set those aside. So after I'd done all of that, I'm going to do my 4th way to use distress inks, which is sponging. It's another reason why I love distress inks. They sponge beautifully, they blend beautifully. It's just gorgeous. So I'm using the little mini ink blending tool and just sponging the color on, basically going from lightest to darkest. So I started with my Tumbled glass because that is my lightest color. And then I'm using the bundled sage and just sponging that on. And this is when I grabbed a little post-it note to kind of hold the leaves with, so I don't get marks on them with my fingers. And then I'm going to go in and add the fired brick and then the ripe persimmon as my last color. So just letting them kind of blend into each other, and sometimes using just the very edge of the tool because these are kind of small. They're not like, a whole card front. So just using the edge of the tool until the leaves were completely covered. Then I'm going to clean off my craft mat here, lay these out, and then I'm going to spray them with my distress sprayer, just holding the little trigger like halfway down, and then letting it sit for about a minute, and then picking up that color or the water with my paper towel. So I have these fun splattered and sponged leaves. So that's 4 different ways to use distress inks. I've got sponging, I've got ink smushing, I've got direct to paper and then spraying, and then I've got watercolor. So you get so much use out of them. They're just so worth it. So yeah, I really wish years ago I had got them instead of holding off for so long. But now that they had the minis, I got all the colors in a lot less time. So anywho, I die cut 8 pieces of white cardstock with the second largest Simon Says Stamp basic rectangles die, and I'm lining that up into my mini MISTI, and I am stamping the sentiment from the Maple Thanks set, so making sure it was going to fit on there with the different sizes of leaves. And then this is where I just do the same thing over and over and over again. I stamped all 8 pieces with that sentiment and Hero Art's Intense black ink, just going in, putting the next piece in and making sure it's butted up against the corner of my MISTI, and then inking up the stamp. And every time I stamped the sentiment twice, so it was really black and crisp. And then just doing that over and over again. So that only took, a couple minutes, got it all stamped. So then once I was done that, I did all of the insides of the cards, same idea. I'd already cut down all of my card bases, which I did in colors to match the colors I used of the distress inks. And all of these are A2 top fold cards, so 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches. And I'm going to stamp each of the leaves 4 times into all the insides of these cards, and I'm stamping it with that same clear embossing ink from Simon. It also works really great as a watermark ink, so it looks tone on tone. So I stamped 4 of the card bases with the maple leaf, and then 4 of the card bases with the oak leaf. So just doing it over and over again after I'd had it lined up. So it's just super quick and easy to finish off the insides of these cards. So I lined up that oak leaf, did the same thing, inked it up with the clear ink, and then stamped it onto the inside of the card, and then did that to the remaining 3 card bases. So once I got to the end, I'm going to line up my last sentiment, and this one is from the oak leaf set, so very grateful. So I got that completely lined up, made sure it was straight, and just made sure it was kind of in the center of my inside of my card. And this I'm going to ink up with that black ink, and same thing, I'm going to stamp it twice, and then basically work my way backwards through all those other card bases so that all the insides are stamped with a leaf and then stamped with the sentiment. So I just keep doing this over and over again, and it doesn't take very long at all, just repetitive. So keep lining it up. That really pale blue cardstock, you can see it in the picture, it's a little bit better at the end. You can see the stamped leaves. It's just so much paler that my camera had a hard time picking it up, but it works. So after all that stamping's done, I can set aside my MISTI, set aside the inks, and then I decided for these card fronts to wrap some hemp around just to kind of give it that little extra something. You know, these are fall themed cards with the leaves. I thought the hemp would be perfect. So I just wrapped that around the card front and then just tied it in a knot. I thought about tying it in a bow because that would look really cute, but I wasn't in the mood to tie a bunch of little bows with hemp. If I was only doing 1 or 2 cards, I totally would have. But since I was doing so many, I was like, yeah, no, I need to get these done. I don't have time. So all of the large die cut leaves, I adhered with some foam adhesive, so they're popped up just a little bit. And then these really fine die cuts, I also die cut that really pale blue. This is Simon Says Sea Glass cardstock that I love. I love that color. So I decided to die cut the same leaf with that super fine leaf just to give it a little extra something. And then I flipped it over and I'm just using a little dabs of multimedia matte adhesive just here and there. I don't need very much of it. This will hold no problem. And I also don't mind that, you know, parts of it are kind of curled up a little bit. It just gives it that little extra bit of, you know, texture and whatnot. So just little dabs of adhesive, press that onto the cardstock, and then I do the exact same thing with the splattered or, you know, ink smushing leaf. So just adding little tiny dabs of that adhesive, and then I'm going to press it onto the cardstock, and then I just put an acrylic block over it while it dries so that this can dry completely and it'll be good to go. So I did that with both of those card fronts here. Just adhered everything and then let them sit and dry. So after I've got all of my leaves adhered, I now need to adhere these panels to my card bases. And I thought about adhering them flat. That was my original idea. But then I decided I wanted to pop them up because it just gives it that extra little bit of dimension. But I didn't want to use my foam tape because when you're doing 8 card fronts, like that's a lot of foam tape. So to get around that, I found another, you know, way for me to use up all this craft foam. This has been shown a bunch of times. I think I've shown it. Jennifer McGuire does this a lot. But layering with craft foam instead of foam tape. So I have all this craft foam. I absolutely hate die cutting craft foam. It's not my thing. I don't like it. It doesn't work for me. But I have it all sitting here and need to use it up. So this was perfect. I cut down several pieces of craft foam, slightly smaller than my card fronts. And I just used colors that were similar to the card bases just because I have, you know, this whole rainbow pack sitting here. And then I'm coating the backs with my Xyron Mega Runner. It ran perfectly on this. It was perfect. I have a hard time. My ATG doesn't usually want to work with this, but the Xyron worked perfectly. So I coated the back, adhered it to the card fronts, and then flipped them over, added the Xyron Mega Runner, and then pressed them to the card bases. And all of these are popped up nicely with some dimension. And then as my final bit of embellishment, just to finish these off, I of course have to add some Tonic Nouveau drops. I'm completely obsessed with them lately. I love that I can add multiple sizes, all the different colors, make little tiny ones, you know, I love them. I need to get all the colors. I've been slowly building my collection, but now it's like, no, I need to own them all because I find myself reaching and wanting certain colors and I don't have them. So I added 3 different colors to these in color as close as I could find to the colors that I used, and then set all of them aside to dry. So same thing, 8 card fronts. It took a while, but I just put them up on a shelf where I couldn't run into them, my kids couldn't get at them, and then let them dry overnight. And that finished off all of these cards. So as always, I will have a link below the video to my blog post. I'll have links to all the supplies used. I will have a link to the color challenge. Anyone can play along. It's open to everyone and we have a new one every Wednesday. So check out the description box below the video. I'll have a link to my blog post and then all the info will be in there if you are interested. Thank you all so much for watching and subscribing and thumbs upping and commenting on my videos. I really appreciate it. And I will see you all very soon in the next one. Bye.